From Pacifica, this is Democracy Now!
America can be a lawful society and a welcoming society at the same time. We can uphold our traditions of assimilating immigrants and honoring our heritage of a nation built on the rule of law. But we have a problem. The laws governing the immigration system aren't working.
As former President George W. Bush urges Republicans to embrace immigration reform, House Republicans declare the Senate immigration bill dead. We'll speak with Democratic Congressmember Jose Gutierrez of Illinois.
Fines we charge billions upon billions on immigrants so that they can be here legally, that will fund more drones, fences, border guards, and more enforcement on a border that is as secure as I've seen in American history. But we'll do it. I asked my Republican colleagues, when is it enough?
Then a look at the strange case of Barrett Brown. An investigative journalist with ties to the hacking collective Anonymous faces over 100 years in jail after revealing details about highly secretive world of private intelligence and military contractors based on hacked information. He's already been held for 300 days.
Some of the most important things that have had the most far-reaching influence and have been the most important in terms of what's been discovered, not just by Anonymous, but by the media in the aftermath, is the result of hacking. That information can't be obtained by the traditional journalistic process, or it can't be obtained or won't be obtained by a congressional committee or a federal oversight committee. For the most part, that information has to be, obtained by hackers.
All that and more coming up. Welcome to Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. Defense attorneys for Army whistleblower Bradley Manning have rested their case after 3 days of testimony. The defense's final witness, Harvard Law professor Yochai Benkler, warned that finding Manning guilty of aiding the enemy for handing material to WikiLeaks could lead to similar charges against any media outlet publishing online. Manning attorney David Coombs also revealed in court a key counterpoint to U.S. claims that Manning's leak helped al-Qaeda and Osama bin Laden. According to Coombs, previously undisclosed testimony shows bin Laden asked his aides to see the leaked WikiLeaks material only after he saw the U.S. government openly describing WikiLeaks as a group helpful to U.S. foes. Coombs said, quote, "The rhetoric is what drives the enemy to actually go look at WikiLeaks, not the actual publication of the information," he said. Manning never took the stand to testify in his own defense, but did give a lengthy statement at his pretrial hearing earlier this year. The trial continues next week with arguments over defense motions to have 7 of Manning's 22 counts dismissed. We'll have more on the Bradley Manning trial later in the broadcast. Details continue to emerge on U.S. surveillance of the global Internet. The Washington Post reports the NSA's PRISM program, mining the servers of major Internet companies like Google and Facebook, has run in parallel with a separate operation called Upstream. Through Upstream, the NSA taps directly into the fiber optic cables that carry the vast majority of global Internet traffic. The U.S. has ensured access by sending a group of federal officials dubbed Team Telecom to reach agreements with global telecom providers. A 2003 agreement with the Asia-based Global Crossing imposed an internal corporate cell of Americans to make sure surveillance requests were approved. Global Crossing was also forced to establish a U.S.-based network operations center where U.S. agents could show up with just 30 minutes' notice. The U.S. has used the Federal Communications Commission as leverage to hold up the approval of cable licenses sought by foreign firms. Google has confirmed the NSA furnished some of the code installed in its new Android phone. The NSA says the code is intended to enhance security against hackers and marketers, but won't confirm whether it also aids the agency's PRISM program monitoring the global Internet. A retired federal judge who served on the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Court that approves government surveillance is calling for reform of the court's duties. The FISA court has come under increased scrutiny in the aftermath of Edward Snowden's disclosures for essentially crafting a secret, separate body of law that abets wholesale spying. The New York Times reported over the weekend the FISA court has become a parallel Supreme Court, issuing over a dozen classified rulings that allow the government to seize mass phone records and Internet data. The Wall Street Journal reports in a series of orders dating back to the mid-2000s, the FISA Court, or FISC, endorsed an expansion of the word relevant to mean an entire database of records on millions of people. On Tuesday, a former member of the FISA Court broke ranks to say the secretive judicial body should be stopped from settling matters of policy. Speaking at a public hearing, former D.C. Circuit Judge James Robertson said, quote, "Anyone who has been a judge will tell you a judge needs to hear both sides of a case. This process needs an adversary," he said. The Obama administration's proceeding with military aid to Egypt 1 week after the ouster of President Mohamed Morsi. Reuters reports the U.S. will send 4 F-16 fighter jets to Egypt next month as part of an annual aid package. 8 more F-16s are due later in the year. At the White House, Press Secretary Jay Carney said the U.S. is still evaluating whether to brand Morsi's removal as a coup, which would require the suspension of military aid.
We are evaluating how the authorities are responding to and handling the current situation. We will take our time and the time necessary to make the determinations regarding what happened last week and the change in leadership, the removal of President Morsi from power.
Egypt's Muslim Brotherhood has called on supporters to hold a major rally Friday. Egyptian prosecutors have issued arrest warrants for top Brotherhood leaders on charges of inciting violence. Despite the standoff, Egypt's interim government says it still hopes to include Muslim Brotherhood officials in the country's new cabinet. Al Jazeera, meanwhile, is reporting the U.S. government helped fund Morsi's opponents in the period before his ouster. According to the investigative reporting program at UC Berkeley, a State Department initiative to promote Middle East democracy gave money to a number of opposition activists and politicians, many of whom backed Morsi's overthrow. The U.S. and China are holding high-level talks in Washington, D.C. for a second day. On Wednesday, Vice President Joe Biden launched the summit with a call for mutual cooperation.
The stakes are very high, because it's fair to say that the dynamic that emerges between our nations will affect not just our peoples, but quite frankly have a significant impact on the entire world.
The summit continues to see a clash over the issue of cyber hacking by both sides. The U.S. is asking China to end cyber piracy of U.S. intellectual property, while China's pointed to the U.S. hacking of Chinese networks revealed by Edward Snowden. The surviving suspect in the Boston Marathon bombing, Dzhokhar Tsarnaev, has pleaded not guilty on 30 counts, including the murders of 4 people, in his first public appearance since the violent standoff after the bombing. Tsarnaev faced a courtroom packed with survivors and victims' relatives. After the hearing, some of those who came said it was difficult to see him in person.
Just his presence being there, you know, after all the destruction he caused and all the hurt he caused everyone, just to be in the same room with him was bothersome. All right, I'm heading home now.
I don't know, I actually felt sick to my stomach. It's very emotional for me, so, you know, I actually felt, I'm angry, but I actually feel really, I don't know, I feel sorry for everybody.
Dzhokhar Tsarnaev could face the death penalty if convicted. The Texas State House has given final approval to a bill that would ban abortion at 20 weeks post-fertilization, hinder access to the pill form of abortion, and shut down nearly all the state's abortion clinics. The bill was blocked last month by a people's filibuster after Texas State Senator Wendy Davis stood and spoke for nearly 11 hours. But Governor Rick Perry revived it by calling a second special legislative session. The bill now heads back to the Texas Senate. During the House vote Thursday, several pro-choice people rose to their feet to voice opposition to the proceedings. State troopers moved in. 5 women were reportedly arrested. One of the most vocal opponents of the Texas anti-choice bill this week was Houston resident Sarah Slayman. Video of her testimony before a Texas State Senate committee Monday went viral after she was interrupted by the committee chair, Republican State Senator Jane Nelson, then hauled from the chamber by state troopers.
Thank you for being you, Texas legislature. You have radicalized hundreds of thousands of us. And no matter what you do for the next 22 days, women and their allies are coming for you. Let's start down the line. Senator Campbell, you're an ophthalmologist, so I won't be making you the expert on reproductive health. We can give you all the children with chlamydia and herpes in their eyes since we don't have sex ed in this state. And Senator Hagar, you're about as helpful. You are about as, excuse me, this is my government, ma'am. I will judge you, and I will speak against an ophthalmologist who says, everyone on the internet can see what you're doing right now. This is a farce. The Texas legislators are a bunch of liars who hate women. These men
Our next witness is Gary Oldham. Is Gary Oldham here?
Yes, ma'am.
Go ahead.
So that they can tell us what to do with the inside of our body.
The Texas House vote was on Wednesday. Slayman spoke on Monday. Meanwhile, in North Carolina, state House Republicans have rushed to quietly advance anti-choice restrictions by attaching them to a bill on motorcycle safety. Some members of a North Carolina House committee were surprised by the move. State Congress member Sam Queen tweeted Wednesday, quote, "New abortion bill being heard in the committee I am on. The public didn't know. I didn't even know." The bill imposes a series of restrictions critics say are aimed at shutting down clinics. The provisions are similar to those passed by the North Carolina Senate last week without a public hearing as part of a bill ostensibly designed to bar Sharia law in the state. Republican Governor Pat McCrory had voiced concern about the way that bill was forced through without the typical procedures and what some pro-choice critics have deemed a sneak attack. A split among Democrats has blocked an effort to reverse the doubling of interest rates on federally subsidized student loans. The interest rate for Stafford loans doubled to 6.8% earlier this month after Congress failed to reach a deal to avoid the hike. On Wednesday, a bipartisan group of senators blocked a Democratic proposal to return the rate to 3.4% retroactively. Several Democrats joined a Republican filibuster after Democratic leaders rejected their proposal to link the student loan rate to market rates and the costs of federal debt. Lawmakers can still reverse the interest hike if they act before most loans are issued next month. California has asked the Supreme Court to release it from an order to reduce its prison population by about 10,000 prisoners this year. A federal panel recently reaffirmed previous decisions ordering the California prison system to reduce overcrowding due to inhumane conditions. According to court documents, at least one California prisoner, quote, needlessly dies every 6 or 7 days due to constitutional deficiencies, unquote. California's had a prisoner suicide rate that at times has been 80% higher than the national average. But in their filing, California officials sought permission to ignore the overcrowding order, citing what it said are improved conditions. The request comes just as nearly 29,000 California prisoners have launched a hunger strike against prison conditions and rules. The strike is now in its third day today and could become the state's largest ever. A group of major North American retail giants have unveiled their own version of a safety plan for garment factories in Bangladesh. The proposal calls for $42 million in spending on worker safety, $100 million in available loans, and factory inspections within 12 months. But unlike a safety plan adopted by mostly European retailers, the new commitments are not legally binding. Major U.S. companies, including Walmart, Gap, and Target, advanced their version after refusing to endorse the European agreement. Both measures followed the factory collapse that killed more than 1,100 garment workers in April and a fire that killed 112 people last November. In addition to shunning binding standards, the U.S. version also calls for, quote, shared accountability in paying for the required safety improvements. The European plan puts the onus for safety funding on the retailers themselves. In a statement, 5 labor rights groups, including the Workers' Rights Consortium and United Students Against Sweatshops, criticized the U.S. retailers, saying, quote, Walmart, Gap, and companies like them simply do not want to make any promises they actually have to keep. Under their scheme, brands and retailers are not obligated to pay 1 cent toward the renovation and repair of their factories in Bangladesh, their statement said. The City Council in Washington, D.C. has approved a measure that would force large retailers to pay workers a living wage of at least $12.50 an hour. The vote came in defiance of a threat from the world's largest retailer, Walmart, which says it will cancel plans to build 3 new stores in the D.C. area. The living wage rule applies to so-called big box retailers with stores of at least 75,000 square feet and annual revenues of at least $1 billion. The bill excludes existing businesses and stores with unionized workplaces. Mayor Vincent Gray has yet to disclose whether or not he'll issue a veto. He faces heavy pressure from Walmart and other major retailers. In addition to canceling plans for 3 stores, Walmart has said it'll consider scrapping another 3 already under construction. A federal judge has approved a request by Chevron to subpoena the personal Internet information of more than 100 people, including environmental activists, journalists, and lawyers. Chevron is seeking the records as part of its effort to bring a conspiracy case against the plaintiffs who've won an $18 billion judgment against Chevron for polluting Ecuador's rainforest. None of the individuals are parties to the lawsuit against Chevron, but Chevron says they may be directly or indirectly involved. Chevron is seeking the IP addresses that show the time and location of every single login over a 9-year period. Virginia's Republican governor, Robert McDonnell, is facing a new scrutiny over newly revealed funding from a prominent donor. The Washington Post reports McDonnell and his family received an additional $120,000 from Star Scientific CEO Johnny Williams. The money came in the form of a $70,000 transfer to a corporation owned by McDonnell and his sister, and a separate $50,000 check to McDonnell's wife. McDonnell says the money was intended as a loan. He is already under investigation for accepting over $20,000 in gifts from Williams in exchange for promoting his company's dietary supplement as an option for Medicare recipients. Police in the Canadian province of Quebec say the number of confirmed dead from a freight train disaster has risen to 20, with another 30 people still missing. The train was carrying crude oil from North Dakota when it derailed and slammed into the town center of Lac-Mégantic. On Wednesday, the head of the railroad company involved said an error by a train engineer was likely to blame.
This was a failure of the brakes. It's very questionable whether the brakes, the hand brakes, were properly applied on this train. As a matter of fact, I'll say they weren't, or else we wouldn't have had this incident.
Closing arguments are expected to begin today in the second-degree murder trial of George Zimmerman. On Wednesday, Zimmerman's defense wrapped its case with Zimmerman declining to take the stand to explain his fatal shooting of Trayvon Martin, an unarmed African-American teenager. Although Zimmerman refused to testify and in turn avoided cross-examination, jurors were able to hear his side of the story in court through recordings of his statements to police, as well as a televised interview with Fox News conducted a year ago. Zimmerman told Fox News he had no regrets about the killing of Trayvon Martin and that it was part of a, quote, God's plan. Although it's acknowledged Zimmerman followed Martin and ignored a police dispatcher's instruction to leave him be, defense attorneys have sought to portray Martin as the aggressor. And the artist, filmmaker, and activist Toshi Seeger has died at the age of 91. She was the wife of Pete Seeger and a key leader and artistic programmer for the Great Hudson River Revival, the annual fundraiser for the Clearwater organization that helped to clean up the Hudson River in New York. She died Tuesday, less than 2 weeks short of what would have been the Seegers' 70th wedding anniversary. And those are some of the headlines. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman.
And I'm Juan Gonzalez. Welcome to all of our listeners and viewers around the country.